Hello everyone. Welcome back to our channel. Today we share with you an incredible story of courage, determination, and never giving up. The story of Winston Churchill. He was not only one of Britain's greatest leaders, but also a symbol of hope when the world was full of fear. Watch till the end to discover how one man's unbreakable spirit changed the course of history. Winston Churchill was born on November 30th, 1874, in the grand surroundings of Blenheim Palace, one of England's most magnificent country houses. From birth, his life seemed marked for greatness. He belonged to an aristocratic family. His father, Lord Randolph Churchill, was a well-known politician and a rising star in the Conservative Party, while his mother, Jenny Jerome, was a glamorous American socialite, known for her charm and connections in high society. On paper, it looked like Winston had everything a child could want: wealth, privilege, and a famous family name. But behind the impressive walls of Blenheim Palace, his childhood was far from warm or easy. His father, busy with politics and his own ambitions, had little time for his son. His mother, admired in fashionable circles, spent more time at parties than by Winston's side. As a boy, he often felt alone and longed for the affection and encouragement that many other children took for granted. At school, Winston faced more struggles. He was not an outstanding student. In fact, he often fell behind in his classes and got poor grades. Teachers found him stubborn and rebellious, a boy more interested in his daydreams than in his lessons. Many of them thought he would never achieve anything important. They saw a boy who refused to follow rules, talked back when he should have stayed quiet, and spent hours lost in books that had nothing to do with the curriculum. But what his teachers missed was that young Winston Churchill had something far more powerful than good grades. He had a fighting spirit that refused to give up. He was endlessly curious about the world beyond the classroom. He loved reading about soldiers, historic battles, and great leaders of the past. Stories of courage and strategy excited him far more than maths or Latin grammar. While other boys memorized facts to pass exams, Winston imagined himself on distant battlefields, commanding armies and writing about heroic adventures. He dreamed not just of seeing the world, but of playing a part in shaping its future. Even in his loneliest moments, that dream stayed with him. Winston's rebelliousness, which frustrated his teachers, was also a sign of his independent mind. He questioned rules that didn't make sense to him, and he was not afraid to speak up when he thought something was wrong. Traits that would later become his greatest strengths as a leader. Despite the coldness of his parents, he found comfort in books and in his own imagination. He wrote letters to his mother, begging for visits and praise, hoping for a few kind words in return. When those words rarely came, he turned that disappointment into determination. Instead of giving up, he decided he would prove his worth through actions, not only to his parents, but to everyone who doubted him. In these early years, the foundations of Winston Churchill's character were laid. A restless energy, a love for adventure, a deep interest in history and warfare, and an iron will that pushed him to keep fighting when others thought he would fail. Many years later, when the world was at war and Britain stood on the edge of disaster, it was these same qualities, the stubbornness, the rebellious courage, the unshakable belief in himself, that would help Winston Churchill become one of the greatest leaders in British history. But back then, in the classrooms where he was scolded for daydreaming, nobody could have guessed that the boy with poor marks and restless spirit would one day stand before the nation and inspire millions to never surrender. Winston's childhood story reminds us that greatness does not always look obvious in the beginning. Sometimes it hides behind bad grades, lonely days, and misunderstood dreams. But with courage, curiosity, and a fighting heart, even a boy who seemed to be failing at school could grow up to change the course of history. After finishing his schooling, Winston Churchill decided to follow the path that excited him most. He joined the British Army. For a young man who loved stories of battles and bravery, The army promised not just adventure, but a chance to prove himself far beyond the classrooms where he had once struggled. Churchill's early military career took him to distant parts of the world that most young Englishmen of his time could only dream of. He served in Cuba, India, Sudan, and South Africa, places that tested his courage and fed his hunger for adventure. But Winston was never content with just being another young officer carrying out orders. Wherever he went, he carried not only his weapons, but also his pen and notebook. He became a war correspondent, writing vivid articles about what he saw on the front lines. His reports were bold, honest, and full of drama, bringing faraway conflicts right into the living rooms of ordinary British people. Through his words, he showed readers the bravery and danger of soldiers fighting in places they could barely find on a map. His talent for storytelling and his love for risk often put him right in the thick of the action. He didn't sit safely behind the lines. Instead, he rode with the cavalry, charged into battles, and witnessed history up close, all while carefully observing every detail so he could write about it later. One of the most dramatic moments of his early career came during the Second Boer War in South Africa. There, while reporting on the war, Churchill was captured by enemy forces and held as a prisoner of war. For many, that would have been the end of the story, but not for Winston. With the same stubbornness that frustrated his teachers at school, he refused to accept his fate. He planned a daring escape, slipping away under the cover of darkness and traveling for days through hostile territory. He hid in freight trains, trekked through the countryside, and trusted strangers to help him, all while enemy soldiers hunted him down. When he finally reached safety, the news of his escape spread like wildfire across Britain. Overnight, Churchill became a national hero. Newspapers printed his face and praised his bravery. People were fascinated by the young soldier journalist who had risked his life to return home. This episode showed the world what Winston Churchill was made of. He was fearless in the face of danger and refused to back down when things looked impossible. His escape was more than just an adventure story. It proved that he was willing to take huge risks to stand up for what he believed in and to protect his own freedom. The young officer who had once been scolded for daydreaming in school was now known across the country for his real-life courage and dramatic storytelling. His reports and books sold well, and his name became known in every corner of Britain, not just as a soldier, but as a bold new voice who could turn battles and escapes into powerful lessons about bravery and leadership. Winston Churchill's time as a soldier and war correspondent built the foundation for what came next. These years taught him about the realities of war, the chaos, the sacrifice, and the courage it demands. They showed him the power of words to shape how people understand conflict, and they gave him the confidence to stand before the British public, not just as a writer or adventurer, but as a man ready to lead. Even then, Churchill knew he was not meant to spend his whole life in uniform. The battlefield was just the first step in his mission to serve his country. He had seen war up close and now dreamed of helping guide Britain's future, not just through a soldier's courage, but through a leader's vision and voice. In 1900, after earning fame as a young soldier and war correspondent, Winston Churchill took his next big step. He entered the world of politics. He became a member of Parliament at just 25 years old. For many young men, that alone would have been enough of an achievement. But for Churchill, it was only the beginning. From his very first days in Parliament, Churchill showed that he was not afraid to challenge the status quo. He was ambitious, outspoken, and full of ideas. He wanted to make a difference, and he believed that speaking his mind was more important than simply following party lines. But Churchill's political journey was anything but smooth. In a time when loyalty to your political party was seen as a mark of honor, Churchill did the unthinkable. He switched parties not once but twice. He started with the Conservative Party, moved to the Liberal Party when he disagreed with conservative policies, and years later returned to the Conservatives. To many people, this made him seem unreliable or opportunistic. They couldn't understand why a politician would take such risks. But for Churchill, principles mattered more than popularity. If he felt his party was wrong, he would not stand by quietly. He believed that true leadership meant standing up for what you believed in, even if it made you unpopular. Churchill's courage to follow his convictions brought him both great successes and bitter failures. He held several important positions in government, where he introduced modern reforms, improved workers' rights, and pushed for change that helped ordinary people. But along the way, he also made big mistakes that cost him dearly. One of the darkest moments of his early political life was during the First World War. As First Lord of the Admiralty, he championed the Gallipoli campaign, a bold plan to break the deadlock of trench warfare by attacking the Ottoman Empire through the Dardanelles. But the plan failed disastrously. Thousands of soldiers lost their lives, and the operation turned into one of Britain's most painful defeats of the war. People were quick to point fingers, and many blamed Churchill personally for the failure. He was forced to resign from his post, and for a time, it seemed like his career was over. Newspapers and critics said he was finished, that his ambition had led to a national tragedy, and that he would never recover his reputation. For many people, such a huge failure would have been the end. But Churchill was not like most people. He refused to give up or hide away. Instead of retreating completely, he rejoined the army and went to fight on the Western Front in France. He chose to stand shoulder to shoulder with the soldiers whose lives he had once tried to guide with his decisions. This willingness to take responsibility and to keep going, no matter how bad things looked, defined Churchill's entire life. He often said, "Success is not final, failure is not fatal. It is the courage to continue that counts." This simple idea was more than just a quote for him. It was the principle that guided him through every high and low. Churchill knew that politics would never be easy. He knew that he would be criticized for his boldness and punished for his mistakes. But he also knew that the only way to achieve anything meaningful was to keep moving forward, no matter what people said about him. His ups and downs in politics built a resilience that few other leaders had. He learned that failure could teach lessons that success never could. He learned that popularity can fade in an instant, but courage and honesty build a reputation that lasts forever. Years later, when Britain faced its darkest hour during the Second World War, it was Churchill's experience with defeat and disappointment that made him the right leader at the right time. The man who had been counted out so many times before would soon rise again, ready to give his country the courage to stand firm when the whole world seemed to be falling apart. In 1940, Europe was on the edge of collapse. Nazi Germany had conquered country after country, and Britain stood almost alone against Hitler's powerful war machine. Many leaders were fearful. Some thought Britain should negotiate peace and accept defeat to avoid destruction. At this critical moment, the country turned to a man who had faced failure, criticism, and countless battles, Winston Churchill. On May 10, 1940, he became Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. He stepped into the role when Britain needed not just a politician, but a leader who could give people the courage to keep fighting when all hope seemed lost. From the very start, Churchill made it clear that he would not back down. He was determined that Britain would never bow to tyranny. His first speeches as Prime Minister were not promises of quick victories. Instead, he spoke honestly about the struggle ahead, telling his people to prepare for hardship, sacrifice, and danger. But in those same speeches, he gave them something even more important: belief. One of his most famous lines came in his very first speech to Parliament as Prime Minister. He said, "I have nothing to offer but blood, toil, tears, and sweat." These words were not comforting. They were a call to action. He reminded the British people that freedom would come at a price, but that price was worth paying. When France fell and German bombs rained down on British cities, many people feared that invasion was only days away. Families hid in underground shelters every night, wondering if their homes would still be standing by morning. Food was rationed, supplies were short, and news from the front lines often brought only bad news. But every time Churchill spoke on the radio or stood before Parliament, he gave people hope. He used simple, powerful words that reached everyone, from soldiers on the front lines to families listening by candlelight in bomb shelters. One of his most famous speeches came during the Battle of Britain, when Nazi planes filled the skies trying to destroy the Royal Air Force. Churchill spoke with pride about the young pilots defending their homeland. He said, "Never in the field of human conflict was so much owed by so many to so few." His words reminded the British people that they were not helpless victims. They were a nation standing strong together. He made every man, woman, and child believe that their courage mattered. Even small acts, growing vegetables in gardens, saving scraps of metal, working long hours in factories, all became part of the great fight for freedom. Churchill's greatest gift was not just his leadership in military strategy. It was his unshakable spirit that he passed on to his people. When Hitler expected Britain to surrender, Churchill stood up and made sure the world knew that would never happen. He declared boldly, "We shall fight on the beaches, we shall fight on the landing grounds, we shall fight in the fields and in the streets, we shall fight in the hills, we shall never surrender." Those words echoed through every radio in Britain and across the seas to allies who still had hope. Even in America, people listened to Churchill's speeches and realized that this was a man who would never accept defeat. Under Churchill's leadership, Britain survived the Blitz, fought back in North Africa, and held on until powerful allies joined the fight. His partnership with leaders like Franklin D. Roosevelt and Joseph Stalin helped build a united force strong enough to defeat Hitler's armies. By the end of the war, Churchill had not only helped save his country, he had inspired the whole world to stand up against tyranny. His words and his unbreakable spirit turned Britain's darkest days into its finest hour. Through it all, Churchill showed what true leadership means. It's not just about making perfect decisions. It's about standing firm when it's easier to give up, and lifting others up when they are ready to fall. He proved that sometimes, a few words spoken with courage can change the course of history. Even now, when people remember Winston Churchill, they don't just think of his battles or his mistakes. They remember the voice that told a nation to stand tall and never surrender, no matter how impossible the fight seemed. Under Churchill's leadership, Britain and its allies achieved what once seemed impossible. They defeated Nazi Germany and ended one of the darkest chapters in human history. Churchill's strong will, clear vision, and powerful words had kept Britain fighting when many thought all hope was lost. When victory finally came in 1945, people celebrated in the streets, and Churchill became a hero not only in Britain but around the world. He was more than just a wartime prime minister. He became a symbol of freedom and democracy. To many people, Churchill represented the unbreakable spirit that stood against tyranny. Nations that had suffered under Nazi rule saw him as the leader whose courage gave them hope. But Churchill's story did not end with the end of the war. In a surprising twist, just a few months after victory in Europe, the British people voted him out of office. Many were tired after years of sacrifice and wanted a new direction, focusing on rebuilding the country and giving people better homes, jobs, and health care. Churchill accepted the people's choice with grace and humility. He didn't hold grudges or walk away in anger. Instead, he continued to speak in Parliament, to write, and to travel the world, warning about new threats like the rise of the Soviet Union and the danger of another conflict. He reminded the world that freedom must always be protected. In 1951, when Britain needed him again, the people brought Churchill back. At the age when most people think about retirement, Churchill stepped back into the role of Prime Minister. It showed that true leaders never really retire from serving their people. They answer the call when they are needed most, no matter how old they are or how many times they've been counted out. While leading the country again, Churchill continued to strengthen Britain's ties with allies like the United States and guided the nation through the early years of the Cold War. Though he faced health challenges, his mind remained sharp, and his words still carried weight. Churchill was not just known for his political leadership, but also for his extraordinary talent with words. He loved writing about history and politics, and his books and speeches inspired millions. In 1953, he received the Nobel Prize in Literature, an honor very few politicians have ever achieved. The Nobel Committee praised him for his brilliant writings and speeches, which had shaped the history of the world and given people hope during the darkest times. His legacy was not only about war or politics, but also about the power of words to unite, inspire, and guide. He showed that sometimes a single voice, filled with courage and belief, can stand up to fear and hatred and change the world's future. Even after he finally stepped down as Prime Minister for the last time, Churchill remained an honored elder statesman. He continued to write, reflect, and remind people that freedom is never free. It must be protected by every new generation. When Winston Churchill died in 1965, leaders and citizens from all over the world gathered to say goodbye to the man who had become a symbol of courage, resilience, and hope. His state funeral was one of the largest in British history. People lined the streets to pay their respects, remembering the leader who had once promised them nothing but blood, toil, tears, and sweat, and who had kept his promise to stand with them to the very end. Today, Churchill's story reminds us that true leadership is not about always winning or never making mistakes. It is about having the courage to speak up, the strength to keep going when you fail, and the wisdom to inspire others to stand strong together. His life is a lesson that words, when spoken with honesty and conviction, can move nations and shape the course of history for generations to come. Winston Churchill's life is proof that you don't have to be perfect at school to achieve greatness. One failure, or many failures, do not define your future. True leaders rise when times are hard. Words have power. Use them to inspire, not divide. Never, ever give up, no matter how tough life gets. His story reminds us that courage and hope can change the world. So friends, this was the story of Winston Churchill, a young boy who struggled at school, a soldier who risked his life, a politician who failed many times but never gave up, and a leader who stood like a rock when the world needed him most. His message for all of us is simple: never give up. Keep fighting. Keep moving forward. Thank you for watching. If you found this story inspiring, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories from history. See you in the next video. Stay strong, stay hopeful, and never stop believing in yourself.